The airport buzzed with its usual chaos that morning, rolling suitcases clattering across polished floors, flight announcements echoing overhead, and the faint scent of coffee from the terminal cafe blending with jet fuel drifting in from the gates. Passengers lined up in neat disorder, boarding passes clutched in their hands, each one carrying a story, a destination, or an escape. Among them was Dr. Maya Henderson, dressed simply in dark jeans, a crisp white blouse, and a black blazer that fit her frame perfectly. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her stride steady. Nothing about her stood out at first glance, except the way people instinctively moved aside when she walked by, as if they sensed something deliberate in her calm. She had arrived early, as she always did, preferring the silence of preparation to the rush of last-minute panic. Her flight to Washington, D.C. was scheduled for 9:30. The airline was running behind, and the mood near the gate had grown tense. She stood in line patiently, holding her identification and boarding pass, her expression unreadable. A few spots ahead, a disagreement was brewing. A tall man in a pilot's uniform stood near the counter, speaking with the gate agent in a low, irritated voice. He looked mid-40s, sharp jawline, polished shoes, and the kind of smirk that suggested he liked to be noticed. His name tag read Capt. W. Harper. He turned to glance at the line, sighing dramatically as if everyone there existed to waste his time. When his eyes met Maya's for a moment, something flickered in his expression, curiosity, then judgment. The line moved forward slowly until it was Maya's turn to check in. She handed her boarding pass and ID to the gate agent with a polite smile. The young woman scanned it and nodded. "You're all set, ma'am. Have a good flight." Before Maya could move, Captain Harper stepped closer, glancing down at the ID still on the counter. "Hold on," he said to the agent. "Let me see that." The agent blinked, confused. "Sir, I already cleared her." "I just want to double-check," Harper said, his voice sharp. He picked up the ID and looked at it for barely a second before smirking. "This looks fake." Maya's brows lifted slightly. "Excuse me?" Harper turned the card over in his hand. "It's a government ID, right?" "It's not real. I've seen dozens of these official cards people print online. I'm guessing you bought this one." The people in line shifted uncomfortably. The gate agent's face flushed. "Captain, she's already cleared through security." "It doesn't matter," he interrupted. "You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak upgrades with fake credentials. It's my job to make sure we don't let the wrong person on board." Maya's voice remained even. "I assure you, Captain, the ID is genuine." He laughed under his breath. "Of course it is. And I'm guessing you're a secret agent too." Her expression didn't change. "Something like that." His smirk widened. "Right. You'll have to do better than that." He glanced toward a nearby trash can, then at the ID in his hand. "We'll let airport security verify this, but we don't need it holding up the line." Before anyone could react, he flicked his lighter open and held it beneath the corner of the ID card. A collective gasp rippled through the waiting passengers as the edge of the card curled black. The gate agent stepped forward in panic. "Captain, stop!" Maya didn't move. She watched silently as the man dropped the half-scorched ID into the trash, looking pleased with himself. "There," he said, brushing his hands off. "If it was fake, it won't matter. If it was real, the government can send her a new one." The air around them seemed to still. The gate agent looked horrified. Passengers exchanged shocked looks. One man whispered, "He can't do that." Maya exhaled slowly and reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. Her movements were calm, deliberate, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. When she withdrew her hand, a second badge caught the light, a polished gold emblem with the letters FBI engraved across the top. The room seemed to shrink. Harper froze. She held the badge between two fingers, her voice steady but cutting through the air like glass. "Dr. Maya Henderson, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you just destroyed federal property, Captain." The color drained from his face. "Director," he stammered. She nodded once, her tone composed. "Yes, and you're about 10 seconds away from turning what could have been a simple apology into an incident report filed with Homeland Security." The gate agent's mouth hung open. "Oh my God," she whispered. Maya turned slightly to her, her tone softening. "It's all right. None of this is your fault." Then back to the pilot, her gaze sharpened again. Do you realize the seriousness of what you just did? Interfering with identification belonging to a federal agency is a federal offense. You didn't just overstep. You obliterated every policy of professionalism you're supposed to uphold. Harper's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sweat dotted his forehead. I didn't know. That's clear, she said, interrupting him. You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You just assumed. Passengers behind her were silent, watching as the scene unfolded, with the uneasy awe of witnessing justice in real time. Maya took a step closer, her voice low enough for only him and the agent to hear. The irony, Captain, is that I was flying to D.C. for a federal safety review, your airline included. The gate agent blinked. Oh, God. Maya's eyes held steady on Harper's. Now I'll make you a deal. You can either call your superior right now and explain what you've done, or I can have my office do it for you in about 15 minutes. Either way, I'm filing a report. Harper nodded quickly, his face pale. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Good, she said simply. She turned to the stunned crowd and added, Please, everyone, thank you for your patience. Go ahead and board. No one spoke as she stepped forward, the gate agent scanning her pass with trembling hands. As she walked down the jet bridge, she could still hear the low murmur behind. The sound of a room remembering what power looked like when it was paired with composure instead of ego. The jet bridge was quiet except for the muffled hum of engines in the distance. Maya walked with slow, deliberate steps, her heels tapping softly against the metal floor. The air was cooler here, and for the first time since the incident, she let her shoulders relax slightly. She wasn't angry, not really. She'd learned long ago that anger wasted energy, better spent on purpose. What unsettled her wasn't the act itself, but the pattern behind it, one she had seen replayed across her life in 100 different forms. People judged before they knew. They assumed before they asked, and every time it happened, someone like her had to decide between silence and confrontation. When she reached her seat in first class, the flight attendant greeted her with a professional smile that faltered when she saw Maya's expression. Good morning, ma'am. Can I take your coat? Maya handed it over, her tone calm. Thank you. The attendant nodded and disappeared toward the galley. Maya settled in, opening her briefcase to review the agenda for her meeting in Washington. But her mind wandered. The memory of the captain's smirk as he held her ID in his hand replayed in her thoughts. The casual arrogance of someone so certain of his own authority that he didn't bother to consider he could be wrong. She'd seen that expression in interrogation rooms, in congressional hearings, and sometimes in the mirror, when she caught herself losing patience with the same world she was trying to change. A few minutes later, the cabin door opened again. Voices echoed faintly from the jet bridge, tense and hurried. Maya didn't look up right away, but when she finally did, she saw Captain Harper walking slowly toward her row. His uniform was immaculate, but his posture had changed. The proud, upright stance was gone, replaced by careful, measured steps. He stopped a few feet from her, clearing his throat softly. Director Henderson, he said quietly, his voice stripped of the confidence it had carried before. May I speak with you for a moment? She closed her folder and turned to him. You may, he hesitated before continuing. I owe you an apology, both as a professional and as a man. What I did back there was inexcusable. I acted without thought, without respect, and I understand how serious that was. Her gaze held steady. Do you? He nodded, his voice tightening. Yes, ma'am. I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know I've already called my superior. I reported the incident myself. She studied him for a long moment, searching for sincerity. What she saw wasn't defiance now, just regret, and something else, something quieter. Shame. Do you know why I didn't stop you the moment you took my ID? She asked finally. He shook his head. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go when you thought no one was watching, she said. That's the truest measure of integrity. Not what you do when people are looking, but what you do when you believe you have power over them. He lowered his eyes. I understand. No, she said gently. You're beginning to. There's a difference. The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke again. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected the uniform you wear, the passengers you serve, and the responsibility that comes with your position. When you're in that cockpit, people trust you with their lives. If you can't respect them on the ground, how can they trust you in the air? He nodded slowly, her words settling like weight on his shoulders. "You're right. And I'll accept whatever comes from this." Maya leaned back slightly. "Good, then learn from it. Change how you see people. That's worth more than any punishment." He nodded again, then hesitated. "I also wanted to apologize for making you relive something you shouldn't have to keep proving, who you are." Her expression softened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "It's not the first time, Captain, and it won't be the last. But each time someone learns. That's how progress works, one uncomfortable lesson at a time." He met her gaze, nodding with quiet respect. "Thank you for not reporting me to the authorities." "I said I was filing a report," she corrected gently, "but not to destroy your career, just to make sure the system that allows moments like this is examined." He looked down, a faint smile of understanding crossing his face. "Fair enough. Fairness," she said, "isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary." He nodded once more, then excused himself quietly, retreating to the cockpit. As the cabin door closed and the crew prepared for takeoff, the air seemed to settle again. The other passengers who had witnessed the exchange now looked at her differently. Not out of fear or fascination, but with respect. As the plane lifted into the sky, Maya gazed out the window at the spreading clouds. She thought about how easily power could twist into arrogance, how thin the line was between authority and abuse of it. She didn't take satisfaction in what had happened. She took responsibility for it, because she knew that every time she handled moments like this, with composure instead of anger, she left the door open for change, not loud, not immediate but real. 2 hours into the flight, the same flight attendant returned with a folded note. "From the captain, ma'am," she said softly. Maya opened it. The handwriting was neat, careful. It read, "Thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed. I'll carry it every time I wear this uniform." She folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her briefcase. The engines hummed softly, the clouds rolled by, and she allowed herself a quiet breath, not of victory, but of peace. The flight landed smoothly at Reagan National just after 1 in the afternoon, the sun glinting off the Potomac River as the wheels kissed the runway. The passengers applauded softly, a habit some still kept, but Maya remained seated, waiting for the cabin to empty. She wasn't in a rush. Her meeting with the Department of Transportation wasn't until 3, and she preferred quiet exits to rushed crowds. When the last few passengers filed past her, murmuring polite goodbyes, she stood, collected her blazer, and stepped into the aisle. The flight attendant smiled nervously as Maya approached. "Director Henderson, thank you for flying with us," she said. "Captain Harper asked if you might have a moment before you go." Maya hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Of course." The cockpit door was open now, sunlight pouring in from the windshield. Harper stood there, cap in his hand, his uniform jacket neatly buttoned. He looked more composed than he had earlier, but still humbled. When he saw her, he stepped forward. "Director," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you again for your patience earlier. I won't pretend I deserve it, but I'm grateful you gave it." Maya studied him for a moment. "Gratitude isn't what I wanted, Captain," she said calmly. "Understanding is." "I know," he replied, "and I do understand now. I reviewed the incident report myself before you left the gate. Reading it written out, it looked worse than I even remembered. The arrogance in it." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I saw myself clearly, and I didn't like what I saw." She nodded once. "That's the first step. You can't change what you don't acknowledge." He took a slow breath. "You could have made this the end of my career. Instead, you made it a lesson I won't forget." Maya's tone softened slightly, because ending someone's job doesn't end the problem. Changing how someone thinks does. He held her gaze for a moment, then said quietly, "For what it's worth, you've reminded me why I became a pilot in the first place. To protect people, to serve them. Somewhere along the way I forgot what that meant." She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then remember now. Carry that forward." He nodded slowly, then extended his hand. She shook it firmly. "Safe flights, Captain," she said, "and safe missions." "Director," he replied, a hint of respect and something close to admiration in his voice. When she stepped off the plane, the terminal was quieter than before. Travelers hurried past, flight crews moved briskly through corridors, and overhead announcements continued their endless rhythm. Maya walked with her usual calm, though her thoughts stayed behind in that cabin. The scene replayed not out of pride but reflection. She'd spent her entire career in rooms where authority and respect were spoken of, like they were earned separately. But moments like this reminded her that they were one and the same. Authority meant nothing if it wasn't wielded with respect. Outside, the government sedan waited near the curb. Her driver, Agent Leon, greeted her with a nod. "Afternoon, Director." "Afternoon, Leon." As they drove through D.C., Maya gazed out the window at the familiar streets, the monuments, the crowded sidewalks, the sense of endless motion. She thought of her father, who had been a postal worker, proud of his job, precise in his routines. He used to tell her, "Dignity isn't what people give you, Maya, it's what you carry even when they try to take it away." She had lived by those words her whole life. But lately she had begun to realize something else. That dignity was also what you gave back when you had power to withhold it. When they reached the Bureau's headquarters, she stepped out and adjusted her jacket, the badge clipped to her belt, catching the sunlight. Inside, her staff greeted her with respectful nods as she walked toward the conference wing. The day's agenda waited neatly on her desk. Security reforms, interagency coordination, budget negotiations. All the usual noise of leadership. But she paused for a moment before sitting down, looking out the tall windows that overlooked Pennsylvania Avenue. The world had shifted slightly for someone today, one man who had looked at her and seen less than she was. And maybe, just maybe, he would never look that way again. That was enough. Her chief of staff entered, holding a folder. "Director, your next briefing is ready." Maya nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." He left the folder on the table and stepped out. Alone in her office, she pulled out the captain's note from her briefcase and read it again. "Thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed. I'll carry it every time I wear this uniform." She smiled faintly, folded the note carefully and placed it in the top drawer beside her father's old keychain. It wasn't about the apology. It was about awareness, the seed planted in someone who had once looked at her and seen nothing. Now perhaps he would look at others differently. Her intercom buzzed. "Director, the meeting's ready to begin." "On my way," she said. She stood, straightened her jacket and walked into the conference room with the same calm grace she had carried down that jet bridge. Around the long table, her team waited, papers spread out, ready for strategy. She looked at each of them in turn, diverse, sharp, capable, and felt a quiet sense of pride. This was her work. Not just catching criminals or managing crises, but shaping what respect looked like in every room she entered. As the meeting began, the conversation turned to aviation security updates. Her mind drifted briefly to Harper again, the man who had learned that power without humility meant nothing. Then she focused fully, her voice steady as she led the discussion. She didn't raise it, didn't command the room through force. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough. When the day finally ended, the city outside had dimmed to gold. She stood by the window watching the streets below, the noise fading into distance. The world would keep moving and so would she. She wasn't naive enough to think moments like that morning would stop happening, but she knew something else. Each one mattered, each one changed someone, even a little. And that was how progress was made. One confrontation, one uncomfortable silence, one burned ID at a time, turning into a lesson worth keeping. The sun had already dipped behind the federal buildings when Maya finally left her office that evening. The hallways of the bureau were quieter now. The echo of footsteps softened against polished floors. Most of her staff had gone home, their desks lit only by the glow of monitors left on standby. She walked slowly, her mind clear for the first time that day, the hum of fluorescent lights fading behind her as she stepped outside. The air carried a faint chill, the kind that always reminded her of the long nights she used to spend as a young field agent, waiting in unmarked cars, watching, learning patience before power ever came. Her car waited by the curb. Agent Leon opened the door, but she gestured for him to stay. "I'll walk a bit," she said quietly. "It's been a long day." He nodded and stepped back, understanding. She began walking down the quiet street toward the park that faced the reflecting pool. Washington's skyline shimmered faintly in the distance. The air smelled of wet stone and new leaves. She passed a food cart shutting down for the night, a family posing for a last-minute photo in front of the Washington Monument, a janitor humming to himself as he swept the marble steps of a nearby building. Ordinary scenes, small human moments. They grounded her more than anything else. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. For a second, she almost ignored it, assuming it was an automated notice from her travel department. But when she opened it, the message was short and direct. "This is Captain Harper. I wanted you to know something. I spoke to my flight crew today. I told them what happened. I told them the truth. I made sure they understood why respect isn't a courtesy. It's a duty. Thank you for letting me face it instead of running from it." Maya read it twice before sliding the phone back into her pocket. She didn't reply. Some messages didn't need answers. The silence afterward carried more weight than any response could. She sat on a bench by the water, the ripples catching the amber glow of the city lights. Somewhere across the country, Harper was likely preparing for another flight, stepping into his cockpit with the same uniform, but a different awareness. That thought brought her a quiet sense of peace. What mattered wasn't that he had been wrong, but that he had changed. A pair of joggers passed by, followed by a woman walking her dog. The world was moving on, unaware of the small transformation that had taken place between two strangers that morning. But Maya knew these were the kinds of moments that built the invisible progress the world often overlooked, the kind that didn't make headlines but reshaped character in silence. She pulled her blazer tighter as the wind picked up. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the water, steady, composed, the face of someone who had carried herself through countless tests of dignity and still stood with grace intact. She thought of her mother, who used to work long shifts at the hospital and never complained, and her father, who had told her that power meant nothing without restraint. She realized how much of them lived in her still. By the time she returned to her car, the streetlights had come on. Agent Leon waited quietly, phone in hand, watching her approach. "Everything all right, Director?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Everything's all right now." The drive home was quiet, the city sliding past in soft light. She looked out the window, her thoughts drifting between the day's events and the faces she'd seen. The captain's guilt, the gate agent's fear, the passenger's shock, and then the stillness afterward, when respect finally replaced disbelief. That stillness was what she remembered most. It wasn't triumph. It was restoration. When she arrived home, her apartment was dark except for the faint light spilling from the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and set it beside a framed photo on the counter. A picture of her younger self in her first field uniform, her parents standing proudly beside her. She touched the frame lightly, then sat by the window overlooking the city. The badge she'd used that morning rested on the table, its gold surface reflecting the light. She thought of how fragile symbols could be, a badge, an ID, a title, and how easily they could be dismissed until someone decided to stand behind them with purpose. That was what she had learned long ago. True power didn't come from the object, but from the character that held it. Across town, in a quiet hotel room near the airport, Captain Harper sat at a small desk, staring at his uniform jacket folded neatly beside him. On the pocket rested a handwritten note he had written after his last flight that day. "Respect is not earned by rank. It's proven by how we treat those without it." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The message was for himself. The next morning, before the first flight of the day, he walked into the crew briefing room and placed the note on the bulletin board where every pilot would see it. No explanation, no story. Just a sentence that would start its own quiet conversation. Back in her apartment, Maya watched the sunrise through the window, the first light painting the city gold. She finished her glass of water, then stood, picking up her badge. The day ahead would bring new challenges, new faces, new moments that tested patience. But that was the work, one interaction at a time, changing what respect looked like in rooms, planes, and institutions that still forgot too easily. As she stepped out her door, the city alive again beneath her, she felt grounded by the same quiet conviction that had guided her all her life. Some lessons weren't taught by force but by composure. Some change didn't roar, it whispered, and people listened when it came from someone who carried truth without anger. And somewhere above the clouds that morning, a pilot adjusted his headset, took a slow breath, and remembered the calm authority in the eyes of the woman whose ID he had burned. That memory would stay with him, not as shame but as a compass pointing him toward something better.